Welcome to Speak Easy Doctors, where we talk about life and how to navigate it with a little more communication. I'm Dr. J.
And I'm Dr. D. We're two BFFs with PhDs in communication, but most importantly, we're human beings figuring things out just like you.
From everyday conversations to life's bigger moments, we're here to explore how words shape our views, experiences, and relationships.
No scripts, no lectures, just honest conversations about life and speaking easier.
So, let's dive in. This is Speak Easy Doctors.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are for informational and educational purposes only. Nothing shared here is intended as medical or mental health advice. One of the hosts is a licensed counselor, but the conversation should not replace professional care or therapy. Please consult a qualified healthcare provider for any personal concerns. Both hosts are PhDs in communication, and our goal in this podcast is to inform and inspire, not to diagnose or treat.
Hello, hello. Welcome to Speak Easy Doctors. Hey, Dr. J.
Bueno, Dr. D.
How's everything going with you this past week?
Very good.
Great.
How are you?
I'm good. I just realized something from our first podcast. I realized when I talk to you, I say the word like pretty much all the time. The whole time I was like. And my husband pointed it out. And I realized that when I talk to you, I go back to my California ways. I mean, short of saying cowabunga and surfs up and cool, I am always saying like, which I think has become a little bit more prevalent. I'm seeing some of the younger generation adopt it too, but I don't typically say like left and right like I did in our first podcast.
Certainly. I guess there's something charming about that. Maybe it takes you back to when you're in your 20s and you and I in Los Angeles, and I don't know.
Did you say like? How come you didn't adopt the likeisms?
I made a very conscious effort to not do that. There was a while I was saying like, or the yeah, no, yeah, or no, yeah, no. That was very prevalent in Los Angeles as well. I did say that for a little while.
It's a perfect example because this week we're going to be talking about code switching.
Different codes, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So a little bit about code switching. Basically, it's when you shift the way you speak or behave or express yourself depending on your audience or the context in which you're speaking. So tell me a little bit about it. You kind of know more.
I don't know about that, but let's see, during the 1950s, I think that was the first time the term code switching was coined. Hagen was an American, Jacobson, a Russian linguist. They started talking about how people started using different languages or dialects to communicate. It's funny because a lot of people thought it was initially a deficit. I don't know if you remember, like in the 80s, bilingualism was seen as a negative thing because your brain could only hold so many things. So that meant you could only speak two languages poorly versus one language with proficiency. Same thing with code switching. A lot of linguists thought, well, that only means you could, when you revert to another language, usually your primary language, the language you were native, that was because you couldn't do it in another language. So in your second or third language. So yeah, but since then it's become more prominent and a lot of linguists, they recognize the nuances involved and people code switch for a variety of reasons to kind of fit in with other people. Or if you're around others who don't speak your language, you want to make a joke that might be off color. So other people don't know what you're talking about, to avoid bias, to strengthen a message or soften a message. So yeah, clarify, things like that.
So do you engage in code switching?
Sure.
Or are you aware? Are you even aware that you're doing it when you do it?
Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. So yeah. I know we've touched on this previously, but I am neurodivergent, and there's something called echolalia, and that's when you repeat. I usually don't curse. I don't know if you've noticed that about me or not. I usually don't. However, I will switch my code if I'm repeating what someone said. I was on the phone with you actually on Tuesday, and you're a very good driver. The people in the North Carolina region are not as good a driver as you are, so inevitably someone will do something that upsets you. And what do you say?
I say, what a wonderful human being that person is, deciding to challenge my
Well,
day in such a way as to help me learn resilience.
you say you say motherfucker, and then I repeat motherfucker. And I noticed I've been doing this since I was young. I usually don't curse on my own, but the only time I will switch that code is when I'm repeating what someone says. And again,
So
that's
you will
Echolalia.
only cuss. You're telling me you will only cuss when somebody else is cussing?
Absolutely. And that's a switch. I think I might be attempting to identify with them because I don't feel comfortable identifying with that myself. It's like I don't have my own voice when using that. Shannon, she loves that Love is Blind show on Netflix.
Mm.
And if someone chooses the wrong person or makes a decision that with which she doesn't agree, she'll say, oh, shit. And then I repeat, oh, shit. So yeah, and I've been doing that since I was young.
And so you're kind of forming solidarity in some way, or at least from the perspective of the person receiving your echolalia. I feel like you're in solidarity with my joy of the resiliency I'm learning from someone who's driving like a damn maniac.
That's the way I always seen it, but obviously there've been times people have become upset with me.
Oh, really? Did they explain the reason?
Well, okay, you probably remember during the 1980s. This is prior to automatic ice makers. You remember you'd have those plastic trays of ice cubes, and you'd have to fill them with water and put them in the freezer to make
I think
ice.
I think people still do that. I
Do
mean,
people still?
I feel like people still do it because I go to a store and I'll still see those things, but now they have shapes. So I think people do it now for
Oh,
fun.
it's more for nostalgia and all right. Well, in any case, my family I was really the only one that would fill the ice cubes, and people would put the trays back empty. And so one day, I think I was 8 or 9 years old, and my mom, she opened the freezer and said, "There's no goddamn ice." And so I repeated, "There's no goddamn ice." Well, I guess Mexican mothers are not really touted for their sense of humor. So is it the same with Filipino mothers, perhaps?
Oh no, yeah, they're
Yes.
very some. It must be the Spanish descent. We share that common colonial system. So
She thought I was making fun of her. So, and I don't know. Sometimes people think I'm making fun of them, and sometimes they don't. So, but you certainly understood. I was in solidarity with you when I repeated what you said.
well, I thank you for that. Now I have to edit this so that we don't have. No, I'm going to keep the. I think I'm going to keep the bad words in this one.
Well, we're not on terrestrial radio or anything. I think we can.
What is terrestrial radio? What is that?
Oh, it's just the old school FM dial,
Oh, is that the term for that?
right? So satellite. There's satellite radio, and then there's terrestrial, which no one really listens to anymore. But do you listen to terrestrial radio?
Only if my inner if my phone is having a hard time playing Spotify or Apple Radio, I gotta revert to that. But it's actually sometimes I remember how much I miss that. Anyway, I know we're digressing, but
So, I guess just to start off, let me ask you, do you have any early memories of switching your language to either fit in with people or avoid bias or anything like that?
not early memories. I actually do it often, or had done it often, I think when my 20s during my career. Okay, so this is a little bit more complex and I'm trying to formulate it in my head, but growing up, obviously I had a lot of Filipino aunts. They had strong accents, and I actually think I adopt some of it on occasion. It'll just kind of pop up and probably is an indicator that I'm regressing to a time uh, when I'm triggered when my when I had to deal with my aunts or my mom. But anyway, so there's that accent. There's a little bit of the way that my culture will communicate certain things, like it will be like she will become he or he will become she. So on occasion, I might switch up my she's and he's. And it's not, I don't know if it's because it has to do with my mom would always say, like, look at him, and it would be her that that I had to be looking at. And I don't know if it has to do with the way that the Filipino language is structured and how it translates, because that's definitely a thing. If people from other countries are not saying the right pronouns or the right, what is it, adjectives or nouns or anything like that, there's always a way that the translation is misconstrued or interpreted differently. right? So with my mother and my aunts, there were certain things like, and this is also interesting, like my grandmother would even say things like, I would like you to fabricate your meal.
What does that
And
mean?
I think she meant like go microwave the frozen dinner or or heat up your meal. But she'd say things like fabricate your meal or it's not turn up the volume. Gosh, I've forgotten. I don't know. Is it do you say turn up the volume or oh no, they'd say raise the volume. I don't know if that's the right. What do you usually say when people say
Increase?
increase?
That's
But basically, there are ways that things were said, and sometimes I was like always searching for the right word, right? Anyway, to just get the story rolling, when I left high school and went into college, I realized that in our generation, there were a lot of convoluted words, and convoluted meaning really complex words to execute a normal basic function, right? Like the word convoluted in and of itself is just saying pretty difficult words. And I remember being at UCLA and thinking, wow, everybody uses these complicated words. And so I started having to bring a dictionary. Back in those days, we didn't have a phone to look up a word. Well, we had phones, but it wasn't that easy to just go and chat GPT everything. Like, what is the word
those
convoluted?
old school Nokias. You couldn't do much with them.
Exactly. So I started to internalize this environment and go, wow, the way I grew up, even though my grandmother complicated things like fabricating your meal, we didn't have this proficiency in the English language. So going back into UCLA, it was a steep learning curve to figure out how to speak in academic speak. I don't know if it's even academic speak because I'm sure that there are certain groups in America, people who have had access to incredible education, have traveled the world, and can execute a certain word, maybe that had French roots and they can say it with a French accent as they speak to it. Just little nuances like that that you start to see in academic settings. And I learned within the first year with my dictionary to look up every word. And then by my second year, I was trying to speak very similarly. I know you talked about in our last episode being able to practice speaking in a way that was a little less, I guess, with a Spanish accent. For me, it was learning to speak in a way with what felt like SAT words, honestly.
And I do remember that too, especially in graduate school, trying to keep up with everyone. And it was really exhausting trying to adopt a new code and all the nuances of that code.
Yeah, I think that even at the most fundamental levels, we experience new codes on the daily. As for people who are out in a culture like I'm in the South, and I haven't necessarily been 100% raised here, but understanding the little nuances of the Southern culture, like even the simple words like bless her heart, a Yankee or a Westerner would come in and go, oh, that's so sweet. But there are undertones to bless her heart here in the
Right. And I
southern
was unaware of that. I lived for a year in Texas. I taught out there. And yeah, and I just made a very conscious decision to not adopt the code out there of that Southern twang. I just could not do it. And I was worried people would think I was making fun of them because I would just launch into like I guess it would be similar to a Hank Hill or Dr. Bell over exaggerated Texas accent. No matter how flat you make a pancake, there's always going to be two sides, something along those lines. And it sounds very insincere, so I never did it.
yeah, so but
That's
you did
just
a
me.
good job right there.
Why, thank you. But I was always fearful people were going, are you making fun of me? I'm going to whoop you, boy. Something like that. I don't know. So I never did that.
I will say that in the southern culture, I do love the word y'all. Y'all is just a beautiful way to, I don't know, say you and everybody here. You just
Yeah.
say y'all.
And fixin', they would always say that in Texas. I'm fixin' to go to the grocery store.
I'm
Um,
fixin'. Yep.
right. I don't know.
Well, anyway, so for that code switching, like I think about the psychology behind code switching.
Absolutely.
And for me, when I was at UCLA and learning the new codes and learning the new language, really, It's not just about the content, right? It's how you say it. So you can't just say the word convoluted. You have to say it with confidence. Otherwise, you sound like you don't know. Like if I said convoluted, or yeah, this is a very convoluted statement, then it's almost like you know what you're saying. So there's tones and there's nonverbals that are incorporated in code switching. So it's language, nonverbal, behavior, the way you use your hands, the way you look when you say it. Code switching is much more complicated than just knowing what the word means. And for me, I think about the psychology behind it, and I think it was a form of self-protection alongside a sense of belonging that I could be a part of this elite institution and learn the lingo and understand it and maneuver through it.
Yeah, and I think for me, I became very aware of code switching, even though I didn't know the term when I was younger. And I know I've talked about this previously in our podcast, but trying to fit in with other children because I was unaware of the code that they spoke. So there would be certain terms that I adopted during the 90s. Do you remember the term cinchy? Everyone was saying that it meant it's a cinch to do it, but oh, that's cinchy. They would use that, and I'd use that term, or they would say psych. Do you remember that term?
I remember psych, not
Yeah.
cinchy. But
Okay.
psych, I think I still use psych on occasion when I'm around others that are our age,
Right.
because if I go younger, they obviously they're like, what is that? What is psych, boomer? But when I use
We're Xers technically, but yes.
but when I use the word psych, it's always around 40 and some 50-year-olds because they feel comfortable. They already acknowledge, they already understand the meaning behind the word psych.
Right. And that's, you make a declarative statement, and then if it's not true, then at the end of that statement, you say psych, because I psyched you out. And that's kind of how the term developed. So I remember using those when I was younger. And of course, being raised around Spanish too, there was a lot of switching. That I did just to kind of mark solidarity. You know, my grandmother and the kind of Spanish we spoke, it's not, they're from northern Mexico, Sonora, that region. So it's more very rural. And when you go to Mexico City, that's considered the very, I don't know, high class style of Spanish. We didn't speak that. You know, I think my grandmother had her first or second grade education. She's not using the kind of Spanish that would be found, I don't know, an academia, I suppose. So that
Yeah.
was the kind of Spanish I was raised around. So when I do switch to it, I sound very vulgar and there's a lot of cussing involved. And that's just how I was raised. So my grandma, she would always use the term pinche, which it's an adjective. It means fucking. I apologize for all the cussing. I'm only doing this for historical accuracy, I assure you. She
Liar.
loved it. She loved the Angels baseball. Are they the California Angels or the Los Angeles Angels or Anaheim Angels now? I don't
I
remember.
don't know because we've moved out, so we're not part of that
And
crowd
but I know they
anymore.
switch up. And anyway, she loved the Angels, and she Beachy Angels, Beachy, Beachy this. So, and I would always say that. I would repeat that just to kind of show solidarity. That yes, I'm, even though I wasn't an Angels fan, that I was in solidarity.
So let's talk about this a little bit in terms of first of all, let's define ways that people use code switching. One of the ways, just like we talked about, was belonging, right? We're learning the code of a I guess a new culture. And for me, it was that academic culture, that institution that was UCLA. For you was being able to speak to your grandmother in this in her form of Spanish. But I also think that it's being used generationally to delineate markers of certain generations. Like Generation Z has their own language. Millennials have their own language. Us Xers, we have our own language, like using the word psych.
Sure, absolutely.
And what do you think are some other ways that code switching is being utilized to mark specific groups?
I mean, identity is obviously the biggest one, and I think trying to fit in. But like we talked about earlier, it could also be used to avoid bias. I mean, very similar to trying to adopt the language of academia. What would happen if you did not adopt that language?
Absolutely. I mean, that is a good question because in my perspective as a person learning the language, right, at that time, I probably subconsciously thought if I do not adopt the language, then I am not meant to be here in the space of high academic achievement. So therefore, I must adopt this language in order. And it's partially belonging. Partially, I wanted my identity to incorporate some sense of intellectualism that was above par from what I grew up with. And I did think that if I didn't adopt it, what does that mean for who I am? Right? Like, oh, if I cannot be this girl that this institution portrays, or at least be able to be comfortable in this type of setting, then maybe I'm not as smart as I thought I was. So there was that metric by which a young girl in her 20s really measured herself by.
Right. And I had very similar experience, and I think I experienced that much younger. My parents, they moved to a certain region of Los Angeles, so I would be at an all white elementary school. They wanted me to learn English, be able to speak it without an accent. And it wasn't enough to just speak, and I know I've mentioned this before, it wasn't enough to just speak English. You have to speak it with a high level of proficiency to mark your identity and avoid bias. If you did have an accent, especially in the 80s or 90s, people would look down on you. Now, obviously, bilingualism is celebrated, much different culture we're in today, but that was part of the reason I tried to be proficient in English. There was a fear I would not be able to fit in with my white peers when I was younger in elementary school.
I mean, I think this is a common theme in BIPOC communities. One of the things that people of color really face is how do we switch between the heritage that we know and the society that we live in? And I believe to some degree, even white culture will do that as well. They
Sure.
will switch from their white culture to, if they're in a space where there's more diversity, they will have to switch and accommodate as well. So I'm not saying that it's only people of color.
Sure, absolutely.
But cultural and racial identity is embedded in our conversations and how we communicate with each other. And I think, and it's something that it's very, I guess, invisible to us as we're doing it, right? Like I think about being with a white dominated space and observing more than when I'm in a diverse space. I am actually with diverse groups of people. I'm a lot more talkative, and I feel like there's more likely people in that environment that can understand where I'm coming from, so I'm able to speak freely. Whereas if it's a white dominated space, white culture by itself, and I'm sure white people in those cultures, they will feel, to some degree, they'll feel a lot more comfortable in that space. And then there's some people who are white that feel comfortable with people of color in a diverse setting. But you just kind of figure out your identity sometimes, and then you go into the space where you feel like your identity aligns with it. And I think it brings out more communication or less communication depending on who you are. And for me, I'm definitely a lot more talkative. I can bring out my intellectual side as well as my non intellectual side, which is my silly side, in my more diverse setting. Whereas when I am in a and I wouldn't say it's only white dominated space because I'm a Filipina, and actually a Filipino dominated space also makes me do the same thing. I will actually sit back and observe for a while, watching my environment. And just like a good chameleon, I talked about how I'm a chameleon, and when I was talking about identity last week, a good chameleon looks at her environment and shifts and understands it. And so for me, that cultural and racial identity is really founded for me in diversity because I was raised in Los Angeles, and I also lived in South Carolina. So in my different classes that I've been exposed to, different social classes. So diversity is very comfortable versus a white dominated space versus a Filipino dominated space. When I think about code switching, I think about how we relate with the comfortable things in our life and what we grew up with. And it doesn't necessarily have to be identified by one type of cultural or racial identity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think again, I wasn't familiar with all the academic terms, code switching or whatnot, but there was always a want to fit in with other people, and there was always a fear I would not. And to this day, I still do some research before I go to a space. You know, if Shannon and I, we go to, I don't know, we might go to a couples retreat at church, for instance, and I always try to do some research about cars or football or anything like that just so I'd be able to interact better. Same thing if I go back home to Los Angeles, I always brush up on my Spanish, what's going on in Mexico right now. I don't know, just so I'd be able to interact a little bit better. I had pieces of information that would allow me to fit in with the culture versus be left out. And that can
I
get exhausting.
think about two things, actually three things with that. Actually, no, I'm going to say I think about two things. Number one is emotional labor. The emotional labor of switching your codes, you having to research like that, using your energy to understand a group of people and then to belong to that group of people or at least be able to engage is definitely emotional labor. And then the second thing I think about is the idea of authenticity versus adaptation. So, authenticity versus adaptation. Who are you authentically, right? And how are you moving through to adapt that? Or are you adapting first, being authentic later?
For me, there was always adaptation comes first. And it's only until very recently that I've started to understand who I am as a person because I'd become so accustomed to switching the code, changing for the sake of, well, it was really out of fear. That was my primary motivator growing up. I didn't want to stick out. I didn't want people to look at me and say, well, that person is different, and difference marks something that might be unfamiliar or something negative. So I don't want to be around that person.
So, what I'm hearing is that to some degree, correct me if I'm wrong, you're having to adapt first, belong next, then you can gauge authenticity after.
Right. Correct. Absolutely.
I think I did adaptation first for a really long time, and I think it's directly related to my emotional labor. So, the more adaptation I did, the increased emotional labor that is. And that's really taxing on me. Thinking back on it, the amount of, and I would even throw in the variable of insecurity. The more adaptation increased emotional labor, which increased my insecurity, because then I began to compare myself to this larger group. Like, I mean, just thinking about UCLA and going to that school, I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to adapt. I've got to do my research, all that emotional labor invested. And to some degree, it put a mirror in front of my face and said, look at me. I am so insecure about who I was and who I am and how I grew up that I have to be uh, invested in this new way of switching my code.
Right.
Yeah, but here's the thing that's I've come to realize in my late 30s and now in my 40s is that the more authentic I am, the less emotional labor I feel and the more secure and confident I am. So it has become quite a journey to go from the opposite end of that group of variables to this current way of being. But I'm going to throw a wrench into this idea. My authenticity does come with a certain skill set, which is communication, right? And I learned that communication by adapting to a number of different environments, and that includes UCLA. So what came
Right.
first, the chicken or the egg? Or what
I
came,
don't know.
do we
Yeah.
need
And
adaptation for authenticity or do we need authenticity for adaptation? Yeah, it's a
that
kind of an interesting
I,
quandary.
it is. Yeah, very much. And yeah, I'm still fearful when I have to use my Spanish, and I overanalyze the interactions I have with people. Shannon and I, we were in Mexico this past summer, and Shannon loves antique shopping, so we went antique shopping. It was in Ensenada, and I remember having a conversation with this woman, and she had this little tiny monkey. My nickname for when I was a child was Monkey Doguito because I had a lot of hair on my body supposedly when I was a baby. Is that common? Anyways, I don't
Um,
know.
I can say yes to make you feel better.
That would make me feel better. Thank you. It just makes me feel like I fit in a little bit more. But anyways, ¿cuánto cuestan por el changuito? And the woman was talking to me a little bit, and I didn't understand all of the words she was speaking, but I was able to get by. And I started to wonder, am I really Mexican? Am I really, or am I just kind of an imposter? Yeah, but it's interactions like that that make me start second guessing myself.
So I guess it comes back down to I was just thinking if you're second guessing yourself, where is that variable of security and confidence within you
I have no
when it
idea
comes
because
to, yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I don't know, because I also, it's the same with interactions in English as well. It's not just in Spanish. I also second guessed, do I really belong here? Did I do okay? Is that person thinking maybe I'm an imposter? I don't know.
Could we do an experiment maybe? What would happen if you decreased your labor, your emotional labor and your investment in research in order to belong, for example, at church? What do you First of all, I would urge you to try that experiment and see what happens. But what's your hypothesis on what could happen if you did that?
There's a fear. That's my number one emotion, that people would think I don't belong. And I think that comes from trauma in the past. I mean, the church I'm at right now is fantastic, but I've had trauma in the past where people have told me, you're offensive, you don't belong here, you're not a real Christian or Catholic, you're not adhering to the unspoken rules. And there's always that fear that's behind it. But yeah, I could. I don't know. And I think the church out here is very different because Colorado is a very different environment. And it's funny when you're a Christian in Los Angeles, I think because Los Angeles is so progressive, there's a want to illustrate that you're very conservative, just to kind of fight the system that you're around. You're in such a progressive area. You really have to mark your identity as right-wing Christian conservative. Versus here in Colorado, everyone's very laid back. So everyone will go smoke marijuana and get drunk. Or what else do we have out here? Mushrooms. And they're talking about legalizing fentanyl. So it's a very different environment. So I think they're more
I really
accepting.
don't want to say everyone because I'm sure somebody from Colorado is going to comment on our podcast and go, not everyone believes that, Dr. J.
No, I know. I'm making a very sweeping assumption. No, because I don't do marijuana either, and I don't do mushrooms. And yeah, maybe I should. I don't know.
Now, if you did, would you be code switching?
Yes, I would. I'm not sure what I would say if I did. I don't know. I've never done them, so I don't
I
know.
mean,
What if I,
technically, yeah. I think you're right. I mean, I was just being flippant with that question, but now that we think about it, code switching includes behaviors.
right?
And
And
if you did, yeah, go
any
on.
substance put in your body is going to alter your speech. Is that is that a mark of who you really are? I mean, sometimes people say truth comes out when you drink alcohol or any other kind of substance. So is that part of your personality? Is that part of your code switching? If you're around people and they're all drinking, for instance, I don't drink when I'm around people, and because I don't drink at all. And sometimes I feel out of place. Or when people are smoking, I don't smoke at all, marijuana. So I guess that
Yeah,
is a
so that's
decision you make.
That's two things. It's the act of, like, let's say in Colorado, a culture of being more accommodating to certain substances and being able to utilize those substances. And so there's that culture. And since I've known James, I'm going to speak directly to the audience. He has never, I guess, drank alcohol. I've never seen you drink alcohol. You've never smoked marijuana. And I mean, you're just not a person that has ever chosen that. You're vegan. You
I
take
don't
care of your
cuss.
body and you don't cuss unless other people cuss first.
Precisely.
So
Yes.
if we have a James that decides to smoke marijuana, that could be a form of code switching because you are altering your behavior to identify with a particular culture or group.
And
And
I'm sure my
then,
language would probably shift too. Yeah.
and because your language, so secondarily, your language would shift because depending on who you are, maybe you'll be a little bit more authentic. There's that authenticity variable.
Maybe
So
that could be the experiment. The next podcast, you and I smoke, even though it's not legal in North Carolina, but I'll send you some and I'll get in trouble.
I will neither refuse or accept this situation.
Let's see. Okay. That's fine. I'm sorry. I
But just to recapitulate slash recap, code switching is a way that we speak, behave, or express ourselves, and we change that or alter it or shift it depending on our audience or the context. I talked about it in the context of being in an academic institution. You talked about it in the context of family. We can also say that it comes from being a part of a cultural or racial identity. We can talk about it as a way that we switch or understand or mark different generations, right? I think that there is something involved with code switching, including the psychology of it, of understanding that it is some form of helping us protect ourselves, make us feel more a part of a group, and then also the that sometimes it comes with an emotional cost or emotional labor, something that we have to invest in, research that we would have to do to be a part of this particular group. But ultimately, there is some interplay here between authenticity and adaptation. And what I want to say here is that who we are as human species, as far back as when Darwin talked about evolution, is also extended to communication and how we adapt in a particular environment through how we communicate or switch is neither bad or good. But I think that there's a lot of people out there that look at that code switch and then they have a perspective about it. But know that every code switch comes with a really big story. And to deny someone that behavior or that way of speaking is to deny a whole group of people a whole lot of interactions and a lot of underlying pervasive events in someone's life that should be validated and affirmed rather than denied or looked down upon. And that's just how I want to end code switching, and that we all do it. As much as people think they don't, you will be code switching without even realizing it, because that is how code switching works. It's something that we, I guess you could say, psychologically have used to adapt into this world and the different settings that we live in.
It's very nicely said. It almost sounds like you're reading from a script. You're quite the orator there, Dr. D. I wish I had that. I do not.
The orator of code switching.
Yes.
Did you see that? I really want to master the whole British code switching because I just love that accent, but I can't do it.
And there's so many different styles of the accent as well. Just like in America, so many dialects.
Yeah, so many dialects. Well, we are signing off from Speakeasy Doctors until we meet again. Right, Dr. J?
Correct, Dr. D.
Right. Talk to y'all later.